Sometimes the smallest act of kindness can change everything. When Caleb Stone pulled a freezing German shepherd from an icy river in the winter of 1887, he had no idea that saving one life would transform his own forever. The broke mountain man figured the dog was lost or abandoned in the Wyoming wilderness. But this shepherd belonged to Samuel Crawford, the wealthiest rancher in 3 territories, a man who had vanished into a blizzard days before. When the dog refused to leave Caleb's side, it pulled him into a dangerous world of land disputes, hired guns, and dark family secrets. The loyal animal knew something about where his master went and why powerful men wanted him gone. What could one dog reveal that would change a poor man's fate? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, subscribe, because tomorrow I've got something special for you. The wind came down from the mountains like a living thing, sharp and cold enough to steal the breath from a man's lungs. Caleb Stone stood at the edge of the half-frozen river, his worn boots planted in snow that came up past his ankles, watching the dark water churn between sheets of ice. He'd come down from his cabin to check his trapline, though he knew in his bones he wouldn't find much. The animals had more sense than to be out in weather like this. He was about to turn back when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the wind or the water, a whimper, faint and desperate, coming from downstream. Caleb moved carefully along the riverbank, his eyes scanning the ice and rocks. There, about 20 yards down, something dark struggled in the water near the far bank, where the current had carved out a channel through the ice. As he got closer, he could see it was a dog, a large one, its head barely above the surface, paws scraping uselessly against the ice shelf. "Easy now," Caleb called out, though he knew the animal probably couldn't hear him over the rush of water. He assessed the situation with the practiced eye of a man who'd spent years surviving in hard country. The ice along the edge was thin, treacherous. The dog was losing strength, would go under in minutes if left alone. Caleb didn't hesitate. He'd seen enough death in his life. He wasn't about to watch another living thing die if he could prevent it. He moved upstream, found a sturdy pine branch that had fallen in the last storm, and worked his way out onto a more stable section of ice. The cold bit through his coat, through his gloves, but he ignored it. He'd felt worse. He extended the branch toward the struggling animal, speaking in low, steady tones. "Come on, boy. Grab hold. That's it." The dog, a German shepherd with a thick coat matted with ice, seemed to understand. It lunged for the branch, and Caleb felt the weight immediately. He braced himself, boots sliding on the ice, and pulled. Slowly, hand over hand, he dragged the animal toward the bank. The dog's eyes met his, brown and intelligent, filled with something that looked almost like gratitude. When they finally reached solid ground, the shepherd collapsed in the snow, sides heaving. Caleb knelt beside it, running his hands over the animal's body, checking for injuries. Male, maybe 3 or 4 years old, well-built and clearly well-bred, no obvious broken bones, but the dog was hypothermic, shaking violently. "Can you walk?" Caleb asked, as if expecting an answer. The dog tried to stand, made it halfway up, then fell again. "All right, then." Caleb Stone was not a large man, but years of mountain living had made him strong in the way that matters, the kind of strength that comes from daily survival rather than leisure. He gathered the dog into his arms, surprised by the weight, and began the trek back to his cabin. The shepherd didn't fight him, just pressed its cold nose against Caleb's neck, still shivering. The cabin sat in a small clearing, backed up against the mountain itself. It was a simple structure, one room with a stone fireplace, chinked logs, and a roof that mostly kept out the weather. Caleb had built it himself 3 years ago, when he'd first come up into these mountains, looking for a place where the world couldn't find him, where memories couldn't reach him quite so easily. He shouldered open the door and carried the dog inside, laying it down on the bearskin rug in front of the fireplace. The coals were still warm from morning. Caleb added kindling, then larger pieces of split pine, and soon had a good fire going. He fetched an old blanket from his bedroll and wrapped it around the shepherd, then filled his dented kettle with snow and set it to melt on the fire's edge. While he waited for the water to warm, Caleb really looked at the dog for the first time. Even half frozen and exhausted, it was a magnificent animal. The breed itself was still relatively rare in this part of the country. Caleb had seen a few in his time working on ranches before Sarah, before everything changed. German shepherds were expensive, brought over from Europe, prized for their intelligence and loyalty. This one had a thick leather collar, he noticed. Well made and obviously expensive. Caleb worked it around, looking for markings, but the leather was so soaked and iced over he couldn't make out any details. He'd check again once it dried. The dog's eyes followed his every movement, alert despite its exhaustion. Caleb poured some of the warmed water into a bowl and held it close. The shepherd lapped at it gratefully, careful, measured drinks. Smart enough not to gulp and make itself sick. "You're a long way from anywhere," Caleb said quietly, settling down onto the floor beside the animal. "Lost? Or did someone lose you?" The dog finished drinking and rested its head on its paws, but kept watching Caleb. In those brown eyes he saw an intelligence that was almost unsettling. This was no ordinary ranch dog. Caleb added another log to the fire and let his mind wander, something he tried not to do too often. This cabin had been his refuge, his escape from a world that had taken everything from him. 3 years ago, his wife Sarah had died of fever during a bitter winter, died while he held her hand and promised her everything would be all right. He'd been working as a ranch hand then, down in the valley, saving money so they could buy a small piece of land of their own. They'd had plans, dreams of a simple life together. After she died, the dreams died with her. Caleb had found he couldn't stay in places where people gathered, couldn't stand the pity in their eyes or the empty condolences. So he'd taken what little money they'd saved, bought some basic trapping supplies, and headed up into the mountains. He told himself it was temporary, just until he could think clearly again. 3 years later, he was still here. The work was hard and the money was poor. He'd take his pelts down to old Pete's trading post in Ironwood once a month, trade them for flour, coffee, ammunition, the basics he needed to survive. Pete never asked questions, never pushed him to talk, and Caleb was grateful for that. Most days he didn't see another human being. Most days that was exactly how he wanted it. But the loneliness had weight to it, a physical presence that pressed down on him in the long winter nights. He'd lie in his bedroll and listen to the wind, and sometimes he'd talk to Sarah as if she was still there, still listening. He knew it wasn't healthy. He knew he was hiding from life rather than living it. But knowing something and having the strength to change it were two different things entirely. The dog shifted, moving closer to the fire, and Caleb reached out without thinking to stroke its head. The shepherd leaned into the touch, and Caleb felt something shift inside his chest, some small crack in the wall he'd built around himself. "Just for tonight," he told the dog. "Once you're strong enough, you'll need to get back to wherever you belong. I'm not looking for company." But even as he said it, he wondered if he was trying to convince the dog or himself. The afternoon faded into evening. Caleb prepared a simple supper, cornmeal mush, and the last of some dried venison. He offered some to the dog, who ate carefully, still weak, but clearly hungry. The animal's shivering had stopped, and its coat was beginning to dry in the fire's warmth. The color was coming back, a rich brown and black, the breed's characteristic markings. As darkness settled over the mountains, Caleb examined the collar more closely. It had dried enough now that he could see it was tooled leather, expensive work. But in the firelight, he still couldn't make out any writing or marks. He'd need daylight for that. The dog settled down on the bearskin rug, and Caleb prepared his own bedroll. He banked the fire, leaving enough coals to keep the cabin warm through the night, and lay down. Through the single window, he could see stars appearing in the clear sky. The storm had passed. Tomorrow he'd figure out what to do about the dog. Tonight, it was enough that they were both alive, both warm, both surviving another day in this hard country. Just before sleep took him, Caleb heard the dog move. He felt its weight settle against his side. He should have pushed it away, maintained the distance. Instead, he rested one hand on the animal's broad back and closed his eyes. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Caleb Stone didn't feel quite so alone. Morning came with pale sunlight filtering through the frost-covered window. Caleb woke to find the dog already awake, sitting at attention near the door, ears perked forward. The animal turned its head when Caleb stirred, and there was something expectant in that gaze, something that spoke of training and discipline. "Need to go out?" Caleb asked, pushing himself up from the bedroll. His joints protested the cold. 42 years old, and some mornings he felt every one of them. He opened the door, and the shepherd trotted out into the snow, moving with more strength than Caleb had expected. The dog was recovering quickly. It sniffed around the clearing, marked a tree, then returned to the cabin as if it had lived there all its life. Caleb couldn't help but smile. There was something almost dignified about the animal's manner. "Come on, then," he said, and the dog followed him back inside. Caleb built up the fire and put coffee on to boil. While it heated, he took the collar in his hands and examined it closely in the morning light. The leather was fine quality, dyed a deep brown, with brass fittings. As he turned it over, he found what he'd been looking for, an engraved brass plate riveted to the collar. The engraving was clear now. Baron was written in elegant script at the top. Below that, a brand mark he recognized, the distinctive C with a horizontal line through it, the Crawford brand, and beneath that, in smaller letters, property of Samuel Crawford, Crawford Ranch, Ironwood Territory. Caleb sat back on his heels, the collar still in his hands. Samuel Crawford. Everyone in 3 territories knew that name. Crawford was the wealthiest rancher in this part of Wyoming, a man who'd built an empire on cattle and land. His ranch sprawled across thousands of acres, controlling vital water rights and the best grazing land in the region. Caleb had never met the man personally, but he'd heard the stories. Crawford was respected, known as fair but hard, the kind of man who'd carved his fortune out of nothing through shrewd dealing and iron will. What was Crawford's dog doing in a frozen river 20 miles from the nearest ranch? Baron sat watching him, head tilted slightly, as if he could sense Caleb's concern. Caleb reached out and scratched behind the dog's ears. "Your owner must be worried sick about you, boy." But even as he said it, something felt wrong. A dog this valuable, this well-trained, doesn't just wander off. And how had Baron ended up in the river? The current could have carried him from upstream, but from where? And why? Caleb's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a horse approaching. He moved to the window and saw old Pete riding up on his sway-backed mare, saddlebags bulging with supplies. Pete made his rounds to the trappers and prospectors in the high country once a week, weather permitting, trading goods for pelts and bringing news from town. Caleb stepped out onto the porch as Pete dismounted. The old man was past 70, weathered as a fence post, with a long grey beard and eyes that had seen just about everything these mountains had to offer. "Morning, Caleb," Pete called out, his breath misting in the cold air. "Thought I'd check on you after that storm. Brought your coffee, and—" He stopped mid-sentence, staring at Baron, who had followed Caleb outside. "Well, I'll be damned. That's Samuel Crawford's dog." "You know this animal?" Caleb asked. "Know of him," Pete said, walking closer. Baron remained calm, watching the old man with alert eyes. "Crawford brought him in from back east somewhere, paid a fortune for him. Heard tell that dog's smarter than most people. Goes everywhere with Crawford." Pete's expression turned serious. "Which makes me wonder what he's doing up here with you." "Found him in the river yesterday," Caleb explained. "Half frozen. I pulled him out, brought him back here to recover." Pete's face went pale. "The river? Lord have mercy." He pulled off his hat and ran a hand through his thin hair. "Caleb, you don't know, do you? You been up here too long without news." "Know what?" Samuel Crawford's missing. Been missing for 5 days now. Went out during that blizzard to survey some property on his northern boundary and never came back. They've had search parties out, but the storm covered any tracks. His daughter's beside herself with worry. The words hit Caleb like a physical blow. He looked down at Barron, understanding dawning. The dog hadn't run off. He'd been with Crawford when something happened. Tell me everything. Pete tied his horse to the porch rail and followed Caleb inside, gratefully accepting a cup of coffee. Barron settled near the fire, but his eyes never left the two men. Crawford headed out 5 days ago, Pete began, wrapping his gnarled hands around the warm cup. Told his daughter Elizabeth he was riding up to check the northern boundary of his land, up near the river gorge. There's been a dispute over that property for years. His brother-in-law, Victor Brennan, has been contesting the land claim, saying the original survey was wrong and part of Crawford's land is actually open range. Brother-in-law? Caleb asked. Crawford's late wife's brother. He married into the family, always figured he'd inherit part of the ranch. But Crawford's wife died 10 years back, and he never had much use for Victor after that. Victor's got his own spread, but it's nothing compared to Crawford's holdings. There's been bad blood between them for years. Pete took a long drink of coffee. Wanted to settle the boundary question once and for all. Took Barron with him, like he always does. The blizzard hit that afternoon, came out of nowhere. When Crawford didn't return that night, Elizabeth sent men out to look for him. They found his horse the next day, wandering loose near the gorge, but no sign of Crawford himself. And no sign of the dog, Caleb added. That's right. They figured both man and dog got caught in the storm, maybe fell into a ravine or got buried in a snowdrift. The search parties have been out every day since, but that's rough country up there, and the storm covered everything. Caleb stood and walked to the window, looking out at the mountains. His mind was working through the pieces, the way he used to when he was tracking in his cavalry days. The river where I found Barron, it feeds down from the gorge area. It does, Pete confirmed. So, if something happened to Crawford up there and the dog escaped, he could have been swept downstream in the current. Could be. Pete studied him carefully. What are you thinking, Caleb? I'm thinking a dog this smart, this loyal, doesn't leave his master unless he has no choice. And I'm thinking Barron survived something that his owner might not have. He turned back to face Pete. You said there's been bad blood between Crawford and his brother-in-law. Pete's expression darkened. Now hold on. I know where your mind's going, and you need to be careful about making accusations like that. Victor Brennan's got money and influence. He's got hired men, the kind who know how to use their guns. I'm not accusing anyone of anything, Caleb said quietly. I'm just trying to understand what happened. What happened is a man went out in a blizzard and didn't come back. It's a tragedy, but it happens out here. You know that as well as anyone. Pete set down his coffee cup and stood. Look, Caleb, I can see what you're thinking of doing, and I'm asking you as a friend not to do it. Take that dog down to the Crawford ranch, return him to Elizabeth, and let her people handle this. Don't get yourself mixed up in the affairs of wealthy folks. It never ends well for people like us. Caleb looked down at Barron. The dog was watching him with those intelligent brown eyes, and there was something in that gaze that looked almost like pleading. This animal knew something, had seen something, and he'd chosen to attach himself to Caleb for a reason. I need to return him anyway, Caleb said finally. It's the right thing to do. That's all I'm asking. Pete picked up his hat. I'll leave your supplies on the porch. You be careful, Caleb. And for God's sake, don't go playing detective. These aren't the kind of people you want to cross. After Pete left, Caleb sat by the fire and thought about what he'd learned. Samuel Crawford missing. A valuable dog that somehow survived and ended up in a river miles from where his master disappeared. A family dispute over land and money, and something in Barron's behavior that suggested the animal knew more than any dog should. Caleb pulled out his late wife's wedding ring from where he kept it on a chain around his neck, hidden under his shirt. He held it in his palm, feeling the weight of it, the warmth of it from his own body heat. Sarah had always pushed him to do the right thing, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. "What would you tell me to do?" he asked the empty air, the way he'd done 100 times since her death. But he already knew the answer. Sarah would tell him to take the dog home, to help if he could, to not turn away from someone in need just because it might be difficult or dangerous. Baron got up and walked over to him, pressed his solid weight against Caleb's leg. Caleb rested his hand on the dog's head, feeling the trust there, the bond that had formed between them in just one day. "All right," he said quietly. "We'll take you home, Baron. But something tells me this is going to be more complicated than just returning a lost dog." Baron's tail wagged once, a slow, measured movement, as if the animal understood and agreed. Caleb stood and began preparing for the journey. The Crawford Ranch was 2 days' ride from here, longer on foot through mountain trails. He'd need supplies, cold weather gear, and he'd need to be smart about it. If Pete was worried enough to warn him, then there was real danger here. But Caleb had been in danger before, had faced it and survived it. And right now, a good man was missing, a daughter was grieving, and a loyal dog had come to him for help. He couldn't turn away from that. He wouldn't. By noon, Caleb had packed what he needed: dried food, extra ammunition for his rifle, blankets, and a few other essentials. He locked up the cabin, though there wasn't much worth stealing, and set out with Baron at his side. The dog stayed close, moving through the snow with the confidence of an animal that knew these mountains. Every now and then, Baron would look back at Caleb, as if making sure he was still following, and something in those glances felt almost like gratitude. As they made their way down the mountain trail, Caleb couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking into something bigger than he understood. Pete's warning echoed in his mind, but so did something else, something deeper, a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in 3 long years. Maybe it was time to stop hiding. Maybe it was time to step back into the world, even if that world was dangerous and complicated. Or maybe he was just a fool who'd rescued a dog and couldn't let go. Either way, there was no turning back now. They left before dawn, while frost still clung to every surface and the world was painted in shades of grey and blue. Caleb rode a sturdy buckskin gelding from the Crawford stables, with Baron ranging ahead on the trail. Elizabeth had provided 2 ranch hands she swore were loyal. Miguel, a quiet man in his 50s who'd worked for Crawford for 30 years, and young Tommy Chen, barely 20, but steady and reliable. Each man carried rope, lanterns, blankets, and enough supplies for 3 days. Elizabeth had also pressed her father's rifle into Caleb's hands, a fine Winchester that had been well maintained and clearly treasured. "He'd want you to have it," she'd said. For this, the rifle felt right in Caleb's hands, balanced and true. It had been a long time since he'd carried a weapon that wasn't worn and battered by hard use. This was a tool made for someone who valued quality and craftsmanship. The ride north took most of the morning. The land grew rougher as they climbed, and by noon they'd reached the gorge country. Here the earth had been carved by ancient waters into a maze of cliffs and canyons, beautiful and treacherous in equal measure. Baron led them unerringly, his nose to the ground, following some trail only he could sense. The dog had changed since returning to Crawford land. He was more alert, more focused, driven by a purpose Caleb could feel but not fully understand. "He knows," Miguel said quietly, watching the dog. "I've worked with Baron since Senor Crawford brought him here. That dog is smarter than most men I know. He understands what we're looking for." They reached the area marked on the map by mid-afternoon. The cliff face rose stark and grey before them, pocked with dark openings that might have been caves or might have been mere shadows. Snow had drifted against the rocks, and icicles hung like teeth from the overhangs. Baron went directly to a narrow opening partially hidden by rockfall, barking sharply. The entrance was small, would require a man to crawl through, but it widened beyond as far as Caleb could see with his lantern. "This is it," he said. They dismounted and prepared for the descent. Miguel produced the ropes and began setting up anchors in the rocks. Tommy checked the lanterns, making sure they had enough oil. Caleb studied the entrance, looking for signs of recent passage. There, in the snow near the opening, partially covered by fresh powder but still visible, boot prints. Someone had gone in here recently, within the last few days, before the last snowfall. "Miguel, look at this." The older man knelt beside him, studying the tracks. His face grew grim. "Samuel Crawford's boots. I'd know them anywhere. He had them made special, with that distinctive heel." He pointed to the print's shape. "How long ago?" "Hard to say with the snow, but not more than a week. Maybe less." Baron was already squeezing through the entrance, disappearing into the darkness. Caleb lit his lantern and followed, the other two men close behind. The cave opened up beyond the narrow entrance into a larger chamber. The air was cold but still, and their lights pushed back the darkness to reveal a natural cathedral of stone. Water had carved fantastic shapes over millennia, creating columns and arches that gleamed with ice. Baron's barking echoed from deeper in the cave system. Caleb followed the sound, moving carefully over the uneven floor. The passage narrowed again, then opened into another chamber, and here they found the first real evidence. A cold campfire, the ashes scattered but recognizable. Blankets that had been used as bedding, now frozen stiff. And there, on a flat rock, a pair of empty food tins and a canteen. "Someone sheltered here," Tommy said, his voice hushed in the enclosed space. Miguel knelt by the campfire, touching the ashes. "Days old, maybe 3 or 4. He looked up at Caleb. "This is where Samuel Crawford came after the ambush." "Ambush?" Tommy asked, surprised. Caleb pointed to the cave entrance they'd come through. "Those tracks weren't wandering, they were purposeful, moving fast. And look here." He indicated scratches on the cave wall near the entrance, fresh marks in the stone. Someone braced themselves here, probably hurt, using the wall for support. Baron barked again from further in, the sound urgent now. They followed, the passage descending, growing narrower and darker. The air grew colder, and Caleb could hear water running somewhere below, an underground stream cutting through the rock. The passage turned sharply, and then they found him. Samuel Crawford lay on a natural shelf of rock, wrapped in a heavy coat, his face pale but his chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. His right leg was splintered crudely with broken branches and torn cloth, the angle suggesting a bad break. Baron was pressed against his side, whining softly, licking the man's face. "Jesus, Mary and Joseph," Miguel breathed, rushing forward. "Senor Crawford, can you hear me?" Crawford's eyes fluttered open. They were fever-bright, unfocused, but after a moment they fixed on Miguel's face. "Miguel," he whispered, his voice cracked and weak. "You came." "Si, patron, we came. And we brought help." Miguel turned to Caleb. "He's burning with fever, that leg, it's infected." Caleb knelt on Crawford's other side, gently examining the injured leg without moving it. The break was bad, compound probably, and the swelling above the makeshift splint told him infection had set in deep. The man needed a doctor, needed one badly, and they were a hard day's travel from help. "Mr. Crawford," Caleb said firmly, trying to cut through the fever fog. "I'm Caleb Stone. I found Baron in the river. We're here to get you out." Crawford's hand shot out with surprising strength, gripping Caleb's arm. "The documents," he gasped. "Did you find the documents?" "What documents?" "Leather case. I had it. Legal papers. Proof." His eyes were wild now, trying to focus. "The silver. I found the silver, in the deeper caves, a whole vein of it. That's why they came. That's why Victor sent them." "Victor Brennan sent men after you?" Caleb asked, keeping his voice calm. "4 men. Cade and 3 others. Ambushed me at the survey point. Knew I'd be there. Knew what I was looking for. Crawford coughed, a wet, painful sound. They wanted the documents, wanted to make it look like an accident. But Barron fought them, gave me time to run, got to the caves but fell, broke my leg in the dark. What about Barron? Miguel asked. How did he end up in the river? I sent him away, told him to run, to get help. Smart boy, he listened. Crawford's hand tightened on Caleb's arm. The documents. I hid them deeper in the caves. Couldn't carry them with the leg. But Victor can't find them. Can't let him have them. The silver, the mineral rights, it all belongs to Elizabeth. My daughter. It's her future. We'll get them, Caleb promised. But first, we need to get you out of here. No time. Crawford's voice was fading, the brief burst of strength leaving him. The documents, they're marked on the wall. Follow the marks. A leather case. Take them to Elizabeth. To Judge Morrison in Cheyenne. He'll know what to do. Promise me. I promise. But Mr. Crawford... Samuel, the older man whispered. Call me Samuel, and thank you for saving my dog. He's the best friend I ever had. His eyes found Barron, and something like peace crossed his features. Good boy, Barron. Good boy. His eyes closed, and for a heart-stopping moment, Caleb thought they'd lost him. But his chest still moved, shallow but steady. Miguel was already unpacking medical supplies, what little they had. We need to stabilize him, get the fever down. Tommy, get water warming. We'll need to clean that wound. While they worked, Caleb stood and studied the deeper cave passages. Somewhere down there, in the darkness, were the documents Samuel Crawford had nearly died protecting. Documents that proved Victor Brennan was willing to murder for silver and land. Barron pressed against his leg, looking up at him with those intelligent eyes. You want me to go get them, don't you? Caleb asked the dog. Barron's tail wagged once, a firm affirmative. All right, but you're staying here with your master. He needs you more than I do right now. The dog whined but settled down beside Samuel, resuming his protective position. Caleb took a lantern and spare rope and headed deeper into the cave system, following marks on the wall that Samuel must have made. The passages grew narrower, winding down into the heart of the mountain. Water dripped from somewhere above, and the sound of the underground stream grew louder. He moved carefully, testing each step, aware that a fall here could be fatal. The marks on the wall continued, small scratches that caught the lantern light. Samuel had been thorough, even injured and in darkness, leaving a trail that could be followed. The passage opened into a final chamber, smaller than the others, and here the underground stream ran through a channel carved in the rock. The water was clear and cold, flowing steadily toward some distant outlet. And there, tucked into a crevice above the water line, wrapped in oilcloth for protection, was the leather document case. Caleb pulled it free and opened it. Inside were maps, survey documents and legal papers. He couldn't read all of it in the lantern light, but he saw enough. Mineral rights, land claims, and a map showing a substantial silver deposit running through the northern section of the Crawford Ranch. This was what Samuel Crawford had found. This was what Victor Brennan had tried to kill him for. Caleb tucked the case inside his coat and began the climb back up through the cave system. His mind was working through the implications. If they took Samuel out now, moved him back to the ranch, Victor would know they'd found him, would know the documents were recovered. The man had already tried murder once. He'd try again, and this time he'd be desperate. They needed to be smart about this, needed to get Samuel to safety, get the documents to someone who could act on them, and do it all before Victor Brennan realized his plan had failed. When Caleb returned to the upper chamber, Miguel had managed to get some water into Samuel and had cleaned the wound as best he could. The older man was unconscious now, which was probably a mercy, given the pain he must be in. How is he? Caleb asked. Alive, but barely. We need to move him, but it won't be easy. That leg, Miguel shook his head. It's bad. We'll use the travois, take it slow. Miguel, I need you to take Samuel back to the ranch. Use the back trails, stay out of sight. When you get there, tell Elizabeth what we found, but tell no one else. No one. Victor Brennan has eyes everywhere. What about you? Tommy asked. Caleb patted the document case under his coat. I'm going to make sure these get to the right people. Baron and I will take the main trail to Cheyenne. Let anyone watching see us leave. If Brennan's men are paying attention, they'll follow me, not you. Miguel understood immediately. You're making yourself the target. Better me than a wounded man on a travois. Besides, Caleb looked down at Baron, I've got good company for the trip. They spent another hour rigging a travois and getting Samuel secured. The man didn't wake, which worried Caleb, but Miguel assured him that Samuel Crawford was too stubborn to die from a broken leg and fever. He'd survived worse in his years building the ranch. As they prepared to part ways, Miguel gripped Caleb's shoulder. Vaya con Dios, amigo. You are doing a good thing. Senor Crawford, he is a good man. His daughter, she is a good woman. They deserve justice. They'll get it, Caleb promised. He watched Miguel and Tommy disappear down the mountain trail with Samuel, then turned to Baron. All right, boy. Looks like it's just you and me again. And something tells me we're about to have company. Baron's hackles rose slightly, his ears swiveling toward the main trail. Someone was coming. Caleb moved quickly away from the cave entrance, leading his horse toward the main trail. Baron stayed close, alert and watchful. They hadn't gone more than 100 yards when Caleb heard the voices, rough and carrying in the cold air. He dismounted and led the horse into a stand of pines, out of sight from the trail. Through the branches, he watched 3 riders approach. Cade, the scarred man from the general store, and 2 others he didn't recognize. All 3 wore gun belts and carried themselves with the casual confidence of men who knew how to use violence. They stopped near the cave entrance, and Cade dismounted, studying the ground. Even from a distance, Caleb could see the man was reading the tracks, seeing the evidence of multiple people, horses, recent activity. Someone's been here, Cade called to his companions. Fresh tracks, can't be more than an hour old. One of the other men, a stocky fellow with a thick beard, spat into the snow. Could be the Crawford search parties. They've been all over this area. Could be. But Cade didn't sound convinced. He walked to the cave entrance, peering inside, then turned and scanned the surrounding terrain. For a moment his eyes passed right over the pine stand where Caleb hid, and Caleb held his breath, one hand on his rifle. Baron pressed against his leg, silent and still, well trained enough to know when stealth was required. After a long moment, Cade mounted up. Let's check the northern pass. If Crawford somehow survived and someone found him, they'd have to bring him out that way. The 3 riders moved off, heading north, away from the back trail Miguel had taken with Samuel. Caleb let out a slow breath. The diversion was working, at least for now, but Cade was smart and thorough. He'd figure out eventually that he was being led astray. Caleb waited until the riders were out of sight, then mounted and headed east toward the main trail to Cheyenne. He kept a steady pace, not running but not dawdling either. If anyone was watching, he wanted to look like a man with purpose, but not panic. The afternoon wore on, shadows lengthening across the snow. Caleb's mind kept returning to Samuel Crawford's words. It was one thing to suspect foul play, another to have it confirmed by the victim himself. Victor Brennan had tried to murder his brother-in-law for silver and land, had failed only because of Baron's loyalty and Samuel's determination to survive. The question now was what to do with that knowledge. The documents in the case under Caleb's coat were legal proof of the mineral rights and land ownership, but they weren't proof of attempted murder. That would be Samuel's word against Victor's, assuming Samuel survived long enough to testify. They needed more, something solid, something that would put Victor Brennan away for good. Baron suddenly stopped, ears pricked forward, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Caleb reined in his horse and listened. There, behind them, the sound of horses moving fast. More than one, closing quickly. Caleb urged his mount forward into rougher country where the terrain would slow pursuers. The buckskin was sure-footed, trained for mountain work, but the riders behind were gaining. He could hear them clearly now, 3 or 4 horses, pushing hard. He crested a rise and saw his options. Ahead, the trail descended into a narrow canyon, rocky and treacherous. To the left, an open slope that would leave him exposed. To the right, thick timber that would slow a horse to a walk. Caleb chose the timber. He dismounted and led the buckskin into the trees, Baron ranging ahead, scouting. Behind them, the pursuers reached the rise. Caleb heard Cade's voice, sharp and certain. He went into the trees. Fan out, he's got something, or he wouldn't be running. So they knew. Somehow, they'd figured out that Caleb had found more than just a lost dog. Caleb moved deeper into the timber, trying to stay quiet. But dry branches snapped underfoot, and his horse's breathing was loud in the stillness. He found a defensive position behind a fallen log and tied the horse out of the line of fire. The Winchester was loaded, and he had extra ammunition in his saddlebags. If it came to shooting, he had the high ground and good cover. He didn't want to kill anyone, but he'd protect himself and the documents Samuel had nearly died for. Baron pressed against his side, tense but quiet. The dog's ears swiveled, tracking the approaching men. 3 sets of footsteps, moving carefully through the timber, spreading out to flank his position. "Stone!" Cade called out. "We know you're in there. No point in making this difficult. We just want to talk." Caleb said nothing, watching the trees, looking for movement. "You've got something that belongs to Mr. Brennan. Papers from the cave. He's willing to pay for them. Good money. Enough to set you up comfortable for a long time." Still, Caleb remained silent, tracking the footsteps as they moved closer. 2 men to his left, 1 to his right. Standard flanking pattern. "Or we can do this the hard way," Cade continued. "Your choice." A branch snapped to Caleb's left, too close. He shifted his aim and saw a man moving between the trees, rifle raised. The man spotted him at the same moment and brought his weapon up. Caleb fired first. The shot echoed through the timber, and the man went down with a cry, clutching his leg. Caleb had aimed low, deliberately, to wound, not kill, but now he'd given away his position. Bullets splintered the log he sheltered behind. Caleb dropped flat and rolled, coming up in a new position. He fired twice, quick shots that sent the other men diving for cover. In the confusion, Baron darted forward, a streak of brown and black, and launched himself at the man on the right. The man screamed, his rifle discharging wildly into the air as he fell backward with 80 pounds of enraged German shepherd on his chest. "Baron!" Caleb shouted. "Back!" The dog released the man's arm and bounded back to Caleb's side, teeth bared, a low growl in his throat. Cade's voice came from behind a thick pine. "You're outnumbered, Stone, and that dog's just going to get himself killed. Be smart, give us the papers and ride away. Nobody else has to get hurt." "If you wanted just the papers," Caleb called back, "you would have offered to buy them at the start, but you led with threats and guns. That tells me you can't let me leave here alive whether I give you the documents or not." A pause, then Cade laughed, a cold sound without humor. "Smart man. Too smart for your own good, maybe." "I've been told that before," Caleb muttered. He was in trouble, and he knew it. 3 against 1, even with Baron's help, wasn't good odds. He could hold them off for a while, but eventually they'd flank him properly or simply wait him out until dark, then rush him under cover of night. He needed an advantage, something to shift the odds. His eyes fell on the document case tucked inside his coat. An idea formed, risky but possible. "Cade!" he called out. "I've got a counter-offer." "I'm listening." "These documents, they're not going to do you any good if they're ashes. I've got a fire striker here, and this leather case burns real nice. So here's the deal. You and your men back off. Let me ride out, and the papers stay intact. You try to take me, and the first thing I do is set them on fire. Then, nobody gets the silver rights. Another pause, longer this time. Caleb could almost hear Cade thinking it through, weighing the risks. How do I know you won't burn them anyway? Because I gave my word to get them to the territorial judge, and I keep my word. A man of honor, Cade said, and there was something almost like respect in his voice. Rare these days. All right, Stone, we'll back off, but this isn't over. You understand that? I understand. Victor Brennan's a powerful man. He's got reach. You make it to Cheyenne. You give those papers to the judge, and you're a dead man. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. And that dog of yours, he'll end up as dead as his master. Samuel Crawford isn't dead, Caleb said flatly. We found him. He's alive, and he's going to testify to everything. Your boss tried to murder him, and he failed. Now it's just a matter of time before the law catches up. The silence that followed was absolute, heavy with implications. Caleb had just revealed his hand, let Cade know that the situation was far worse for Victor Brennan than the man had imagined. But it also meant Cade would rush back to warn his employer, would potentially lead Caleb right to where he needed to go. You're a fool, Cade said finally. But I'll give you this much. You've got courage. Let's go, boys. We need to talk to Mr. Brennan. Caleb listened as the three men retreated, helping their wounded companions, the sounds fading into the distance. He waited a full 10 minutes before moving, making sure it wasn't a trick. Barron whined softly, pressing against him. I know, boy, Caleb said quietly. That was risky. But now they know Samuel's alive, which means Brennan will have to act fast. Desperate men make mistakes. He mounted the buckskin and headed back to the main trail, Barron trotting beside him. The sun was setting now, painting the snow in shades of orange and pink, beautiful and cold and unforgiving, like everything else in this country. Caleb touched the document case under his coat, feeling the weight of what he carried. Not just papers, but a man's life work, a daughter's inheritance, and the key to bringing a murderer to justice. He had a long ride ahead of him to Cheyenne, and something told him Victor Brennan wouldn't wait quietly for justice to arrive. Caleb made camp that night in a sheltered ravine, with rocks at his back and a clear view of the approaches. He built a small fire, just enough for warmth and coffee, and sat with the Winchester across his knees while Barron kept watch at the edge of the firelight. Sleep came in fits and starts, his mind too active to rest properly. He kept thinking about Samuel Crawford's words, about Victor Brennan's desperation, about the silver vein that ran through the mountain like a promise of fortune. How far would a man go for that kind of wealth? How many lives would he destroy? Caleb had seen greed before, during his cavalry days and in the years working ranches. He'd seen men kill for far less than silver and land. But there was something particularly cold about this kind of betrayal, family turning on family, a man trying to murder his own brother-in-law for money. He pulled Sarah's wedding ring from beneath his shirt and held it in his palm, feeling the smooth metal warm from his body heat. What would she think of him now? Riding into danger for people he barely knew, risking everything for justice that wasn't his to seek, but he knew the answer. Sarah would have done the same thing. She'd always believed in standing up for what was right, consequences be damned. It was one of the things he'd loved most about her. I'm trying to do what you'd want, he whispered to the ring, to her memory. Hope I'm not making a fool of myself. Barron's low growl brought him instantly alert. The dog was staring into the darkness beyond the fire, hackles raised, body tense. Caleb doused the fire with snow and moved into the shadows, rifle ready. He waited, listening, every sense straining. There, the soft sound of boots on snow, someone trying to move quietly but not quite managing it. One person, from the sound of it, approaching from the west. Don't shoot. The voice was female, clear and calm. I'm not armed, and I'm coming into the firelight. My name is Elizabeth Crawford. Caleb hesitated, then said, "Come ahead slowly. Keep your hands where I can see them." She stepped into the dying glow of the covered coals, and it was indeed Elizabeth Crawford, dressed in riding clothes, with a heavy coat against the cold. She was alone as far as Caleb could tell, and she looked exhausted. "What are you doing here?" Caleb demanded, not lowering the rifle. "Following you. I've been on your trail since you left the caves." She moved closer, her hands raised peacefully. "Please, Mr. Stone, I need to talk to you. It's important." Baron approached her, sniffing, then wagged his tail once. That was good enough for Caleb. He lowered the rifle. "I know, but I had to reach you before you got to Cheyenne." She looked around the camp. "May I sit?" Caleb gestured to a flat rock near the covered fire. Elizabeth settled onto it gratefully, rubbing her hands together for warmth. In the dim light, Caleb could see the strain in her face, the dark circles under her eyes. "Miguel got my father back to the ranch," she said quietly. "The doctor's with him now. He says my father will survive, though the recovery will be long. But he's alive, and that's what matters." "That's good news." "It is." Elizabeth looked at him directly. "My father told me what happened in the cave, what he told you about Victor, about the ambush. He also told me you promised to get the documents to Judge Morrison in Cheyenne." "That's right. Mr. Stone, I'm asking you not to do that." "Not yet." Caleb stared at her. "Ma'am, those documents are evidence. They prove your mineral rights and your father's land claim. Combined with your father's testimony, they'll put Victor Brennan in prison for attempted murder." "I know, but there's something you don't know. Something my father doesn't know." Elizabeth took a deep breath. "Victor Brennan has been planning this for a long time. Months, maybe longer. And he's been thorough. 3 days before my father disappeared, Victor filed papers in Cheyenne, claiming that my father had signed over the northern section of the ranch to him as settlement of their dispute. The documents are forged, of course, but they look legitimate. They have my father's signature, or a very good copy of it." Caleb felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "So even if we prove the land claim and mineral rights, Victor has a legal document saying your father gave him that land." "Exactly. And worse, Victor has witnesses, 3 men who will swear they saw my father sign the papers willingly, settling the family dispute to avoid further conflict. It's all very neat, very legal. Victor's been building his case for months, knowing he'd need it after my father was gone. But your father's not gone. He can testify the documents are forged." "Can he?" Elizabeth's voice was bitter. "Victor will say my father is confused, traumatized from his ordeal in the caves. He'll say the fever has affected my father's mind. And he'll have doctors who'll back him up, experts who'll cast doubt on anything my father says. It becomes he said, she said, and Victor has the documents and the witnesses." Caleb sat down heavily on a nearby rock. "So taking these papers to the judge won't be enough." "No. We need proof of Victor's conspiracy. Real proof, something that can't be disputed or explained away." Elizabeth leaned forward. "My father mentioned that you served in the cavalry, that you were a scout, long time ago, but you still have the skills, the instincts, and you have something my father's men don't have. Victor doesn't know you. Oh, he knows you found Baron and that you helped search for my father. But he doesn't know you're involved beyond that. You could get close to him, find the proof we need." Caleb shook his head. "Ma'am, I appreciate your confidence, but I'm not a detective or a lawman. I'm just a trapper who got caught up in something bigger than he expected." "You're more than that." Elizabeth's voice was firm. "My father is an excellent judge of character. He told me to trust you, said you reminded him of himself when he was younger. He said you're a man who does the right thing, even when it's hard, even when it's dangerous. Your father doesn't know me. Maybe not. But Baron does." She gestured to the dog, who sat between them watching the conversation with his intelligent eyes. And Baron is never wrong about people. He chose you, Mr. Stone. He could have gone to anyone when he escaped the ambush, could have returned to the ranch on his own. But he went downstream, away from home, and led you to find him. I think he knew you were the one person who could help. It was a fanciful idea, attributing that kind of reasoning to a dog. But looking at Baron, Caleb couldn't entirely dismiss it. There was something about the animal, an awareness that went beyond normal canine intelligence. Even if I wanted to help, Caleb said slowly, I wouldn't know where to start. How do you prove a conspiracy when the conspirator has covered his tracks so well? Elizabeth reached into her coat and pulled out a folded paper. Victor is staying at the Grand Hotel in Ironwood. He's taken the entire top floor, has his men with him. But tomorrow night, there's a territorial council meeting. All the major ranchers will attend, including Victor. He'll have to be there to maintain appearances, to show he's a legitimate landowner concerned about the territory's future. So, while he's at the meeting, his rooms are empty. Exactly. He keeps his personal papers there, his correspondence, his business records. If there's proof of the forgery of the conspiracy, it would be there. Caleb understood what she was asking. You want me to break into his rooms and search them? I want you to find the evidence that will put him in prison where he belongs. Elizabeth's voice was steady, but her hands were shaking slightly. My father almost died because of Victor's greed. Baron almost died. And if Victor succeeds, he'll take everything my father built, everything that should go to keeping the ranch running and the people who depend on it employed. This isn't just about money, Mr. Stone. It's about justice. Caleb stood and walked to the edge of the camp, looking out at the dark mountains. Everything in him said to walk away, to deliver the documents to the judge and let the law sort it out. He'd done his part. He'd found Samuel, returned Baron, recovered the mineral rights papers. He didn't owe these people anything more. But that wasn't quite true, was it? He owed Baron, who'd trusted him when the dog had every reason to trust no one. He owed Samuel, who'd survived against impossible odds and still had the strength to care about justice for his daughter. And maybe, in some way, he owed Sarah's memory, owed it to her to be the kind of man she'd believed he was. If I do this, he said finally, and if I find proof, what then? Victor's still a powerful man with dangerous friends. Then we take everything to Territorial Marshal Hendricks in Cheyenne. He's honest, can't be bought, and he has the authority to arrest Victor regardless of his connections. With my father's testimony, the real documents and proof of the forgery, even Victor's lawyers won't be able to save him. Caleb turned back to face her. And if I don't find anything? If Victor was smart enough to keep no written record? Then we proceed as planned, take what we have to Judge Morrison and hope it's enough. But at least we'll have tried everything. Elizabeth stood and walked over to him. Mr. Stone, Caleb, I know I'm asking a lot. I know you didn't sign up for any of this when you pulled a dog from a river, but I'm asking anyway because I don't have anyone else I can trust. Will you help us? The weight of her gaze, the hope and determination mixed together, reminded Caleb so much of Sarah in that moment that it took his breath away. This was what Sarah would have done, would have asked him to do. He looked down at Baron, who sat watching him with those knowing eyes. All right, he said quietly. I'll do it. But we do this smart, no unnecessary risks, and if it looks too dangerous, we abort. Agreed? Elizabeth's face lit up with relief. Agreed. Thank you, Mr. Stone, thank you. Don't thank me yet. We haven't found anything. Caleb picked up his rifle and began breaking camp. If we're going to do this, we need to get to Ironwood before that council meeting, and we'll need a plan. A good one. As they prepared to ride, Baron pressed against Caleb's leg, and for just a moment Caleb rested his hand on the dog's head. You're getting me into a lot of trouble, you know that. Baron's tail wagged, and if a dog could smile, Caleb would have sworn Baron was grinning. They rode through the remainder of the night, reaching the outskirts of Ironwood just before dawn. Elizabeth led them to a small house on the edge of town, owned by an elderly couple who'd worked for her father years ago. They welcomed Elizabeth warmly and asked no questions about Caleb's presence. Over breakfast, they refined the plan. The council meeting would start at 7 in the evening and typically ran for 2 to 3 hours. That would give Caleb a narrow window to search Victor's rooms. Elizabeth would attend the meeting herself, partly to keep an eye on Victor, partly to maintain appearances. If anything went wrong, she'd create a distraction to buy him time to escape. "What about his men?" Caleb asked. "The ones he keeps at the hotel? Most of them will be with him at the meeting, providing security. But he always leaves at least 2 men behind to watch his rooms." Elizabeth frowned. "That's the part I haven't figured out yet." Caleb thought about it, turning the problem over in his mind. 2 men, probably positioned in the hallway outside Victor's suite. He couldn't fight them without raising an alarm, and he couldn't talk his way past them. But maybe he didn't need to. "Baron," he said suddenly. "Baron stays with me." Elizabeth looked confused. "I don't understand." "Victor's men know Baron. They know he belonged to your father. If Baron appears at the hotel, acting distressed or lost, drawing attention, those guards will have to respond. They'll try to catch him, maybe take him to Victor at the meeting. Either way, it creates confusion, pulls them away from the doors." "It could work," Elizabeth said slowly, "but it's risky for Baron." "Less risky than me trying to fight 2 armed men." Caleb looked at the dog. "What do you think, boy?" Baron's tail thumped against the floor, and Caleb took that as agreement. They spent the day resting and preparing. Caleb cleaned his weapons and went over the layout of the grand hotel that Elizabeth sketched from memory. The top floor had a central hallway with Victor's suite at the end, multiple rooms, and a back stairway that was rarely used. That would be his way in and his way out. As evening approached and Elizabeth prepared to leave for the council meeting, she pressed something into Caleb's hand. It was a small silver pocket watch, engraved with the initials S.C. "My father wanted you to have this," she said. "He said to tell you that it belonged to his father, and it's given to men of honor. He said you'd understand." Caleb opened the watch. Inside the cover was an inscription, "Do what's right, no matter the cost." The same words his own father had told him, the same principle that had guided him through life. He closed the watch and tucked it into his pocket next to his father's. 2 watches now, 2 legacies of honor binding him to this course. "Tell your father thank you," he said, "and tell him I'll do my best to honor this gift." As the sun set over Ironwood, Caleb and Baron made their way toward the Grand Hotel, ready to finish what a frozen river had started. Caleb fired twice at the muzzle flashes in the pass, forcing the shooters to duck. It wouldn't stop them, but it would slow them down, make them cautious. Every second counted now. He was calculating his next move, considering a desperate run up the slope on foot, when he heard something that made his heart leap. The sound of multiple horses approaching fast from behind the pass. From the east, where Cheyenne lay, more of Victor's men, cutting off any possible escape. Except the voice that rang out wasn't one of Victor's hired guns. "Federal Marshal, drop your weapons." Gunfire erupted from the pass, but now it was directed at the shooters in the rocks above. Caleb saw men in dark coats moving through the narrow gap, rifles up, firing with professional precision. The ambushers in the rocks returned fire desperately, but they were caught between Caleb below and the newcomers above. It was over in less than a minute. One of Victor's men threw down his rifle and raised his hands. The other tried to run and took a bullet in the leg, going down hard. A tall man in a marshal's coat appeared at the edge of the pass, his rifle trained on the downed men. He had iron-grey hair and a weathered face that spoke of years enforcing the law in hard country. "Caleb Stone?" he called down. "That's me," Caleb answered, not lowering his own rifle yet. He'd been fooled before. "Marshal Hendricks, Territorial Marshal's Office. Elizabeth Crawford sent word you might be coming this way with some important documents. She asked me to keep an eye out for you." Caleb felt relief wash through him. You've got excellent timing, Marshal. We've been tracking those riders behind you since dawn. Figured they were up to no good when they wouldn't stop for identification. Hendricks gestured for his deputies to secure the prisoners. You have those documents Miss Crawford mentioned. Caleb patted his saddlebag. Right here. Letters from Victor Brennan, detailing a conspiracy to murder Samuel Crawford and steal his land. I'll need to see those. But first, we should probably deal with the 5 men about to catch up with you. As if on cue, Cade and his riders appeared on the trail below, pulling up short when they saw the situation. Cade's hand went to his gun, but Hendricks called down to him. I wouldn't if I were you, Cade. You're outnumbered, and we've already taken 2 of your friends into custody. Make the smart choice. For a long moment, Caleb thought Cade might actually try to fight his way out. The scarred gunman's face was tight with frustration and calculation, but then he slowly raised his hands, and his men followed suit. Smart, Hendricks said. He sent 3 deputies down to disarm and secure them while he made his way down to Caleb's position. Up close, the marshal had keen blue eyes that missed nothing. He studied Caleb carefully, taking in the worn clothes, the battered rifle, the exhaustion in his face. You're the trapper from the high country, Hendricks said. The one who found Samuel Crawford's dog. Yes, sir. Seems like that dog led you into quite a bit of trouble. Caleb looked at Barron, who sat calmly beside him despite the recent violence. He led me to the truth. The trouble was already there. Hendricks smiled slightly. Fair point. Let me see those letters. Caleb pulled them from his saddlebag and handed them over. The marshal read through them carefully, his expression growing darker with each page. When he finished, he looked up at Caleb with something like respect. This is damning evidence. With Samuel Crawford's testimony and these letters, Victor Brennan is going to prison for a long time. He folded the letters carefully. But you took a hell of a risk getting them, breaking into a man's hotel room, stealing documents that could be viewed as a crime itself. I know, but it was the only way to prove the truth. Sometimes the law and justice don't line up as neat as we'd like, Hendricks acknowledged. He glanced at Cade and the other prisoners being led away. Fortunately for you, I'm more interested in justice than procedure. These men were trying to kill you to protect a murderer and land thief. That tells me everything I need to know about whose side the law should be on. One of the deputies approached. Marshal, the prisoners are secured. What do you want us to do with them? Take them to Cheyenne. Lock them up pending charges of attempted murder, conspiracy, and anything else I can think of. Hendricks turned back to Caleb. You'll need to come with us. Give a full statement. And I'll want to speak with Samuel Crawford as soon as he's able. Of course. In the meantime, the marshal continued, reaching into his coat, I have something for you. Elizabeth Crawford asked me to give you this if I found you alive. He handed Caleb a sealed envelope. Caleb opened it and found a brief letter in Elizabeth's handwriting. Mr. Stone, if you're reading this, then you made it to safety and justice is within reach. My father wanted me to tell you that you'll always have a home at the Crawford Ranch and a position as foreman if you want it. But more than that, you have our eternal gratitude and friendship. What you've done for our family can never be repaid, only honored. With deepest thanks, Elizabeth Crawford. Caleb folded the letter carefully and put it in his pocket next to the 2 watches. A week ago, he'd been alone in a mountain cabin, hiding from the world, convinced his life held nothing but empty days and painful memories. Now he had people who cared whether he lived or died, who valued him not for what he'd been, but for what he'd done. He looked down at Barron, who sat pressed against his leg, faithful and true. The dog had started all of this, had somehow known that Caleb was the right person to help, the right person to trust. Thank you, Caleb said quietly, knowing the dog couldn't understand but needing to say it anyway. For everything. Barron's tail wagged, a slow, deliberate movement, and those intelligent brown eyes looked up at him with something that might have been understanding, or pride, or simple loyalty. Maybe it was all three. Hendricks mounted his horse and gestured for his men to form up. "Let's ride, gentlemen. We've got a corrupt rancher to arrest and justice to serve." As they headed toward Cheyenne, Caleb riding alongside the marshal with Baron trotting beside them, he felt something he hadn't felt in 3 long years. Peace. Not the peace of isolation and avoidance, but the peace of a man who'd faced his fears, done the right thing, and found his way back to living instead of just surviving. The sun was setting behind them, painting the plains in shades of gold and orange. Ahead lay Cheyenne, and after that, whatever future he chose to make. For the first time since Sarah's death, Caleb Stone was looking forward to tomorrow. 3 weeks had passed since Marshal Hendricks arrested Victor Brennan at the Grand Hotel in Ironwood. The man had tried to bluster his way out, claiming persecution and conspiracy, but the evidence was overwhelming. His own letters condemned him, and when faced with long prison terms, 2 of his hired men turned witness against him, providing testimony about the ambush and attempted murder of Samuel Crawford. The trial had been swift. Territorial Judge Morrison, the same judge Samuel had wanted the documents delivered to, presided with stern efficiency. Victor Brennan was convicted of attempted murder, conspiracy to commit fraud, and a dozen other charges. He was sentenced to 20 years in the territorial prison, his property seized to pay restitution to the Crawford family. Caleb had testified at the trial, standing in the witness box and telling the story of finding Baron in the river, discovering Samuel in the caves, and recovering the evidence that proved the conspiracy. The judge had listened carefully, and at the end of Caleb's testimony he'd made a point of thanking him for his service to justice. It felt strange to be thanked for simply doing what was right, but Caleb accepted it with quiet grace, the way his father had taught him to accept genuine praise. Now, on a bright morning in early spring, Caleb stood on a low rise overlooking the Crawford ranch. The snow had melted from all but the highest peaks, and the valley was greening up nicely. Cattle grazed in the pastures, and smoke rose from the chimneys of the ranch buildings. It looked prosperous and peaceful, exactly what Samuel Crawford had built over a lifetime of hard work. Baron sat beside him. As always, the dog's presence a constant comfort. Over the past weeks, the bond between them had deepened into something Caleb couldn't quite name. It wasn't just that Baron was well-trained or loyal, it was something more, a connection that transcended the usual relationship between man and dog. Samuel Crawford was walking toward them from the main house, moving slowly but steadily. His leg had healed well, though he'd carry a limp for the rest of his life. But he was alive, active, and back to running his ranch. That was more than anyone had dared hope a month ago. "Morning, Caleb," Samuel said, reaching the rise. He leaned on his cane, not from weakness but from habit, his weathered face breaking into a genuine smile. "Baron." The dog's tail wagged, but he didn't leave Caleb's side. Samuel noticed, and his smile grew wider. "He's made his choice, hasn't he? I always knew that dog had excellent judgment." "He was your dog first," Caleb said. "Still is, if you want him back." "No." Samuel's voice was firm. "Baron chose you the moment you pulled him from that river. He stayed loyal to me all those years because I needed him. But you need him more now, and he knows it. Besides, a man couldn't ask for a better friend for his dog than the man who saved both their lives." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the ranch below. Finally, Samuel spoke again. "Elizabeth told me you accepted the foreman position." "I did. If the offer still stands." "It does." More than ever. Samuel turned to face him directly. "Caleb, you gave me my life back. You gave my daughter her future back. You brought a criminal to justice when everyone else was ready to let him get away with murder. The least I can do is give you a place to call home, work that matters, and a chance to build something worth building." Caleb felt the familiar weight of the 2 pocket watches in his vest. His father's watch and the one Samuel had given him, both inscribed with the same essential truth: do what's right, no matter the cost. He'd followed that principle, and it had led him here, to this moment, to a second chance he hadn't dared hope for. "I appreciate it more than I can say," Caleb replied quietly. "It's been a long time since I felt like I belonged anywhere." "You belong here." Samuel put a hand on his shoulder, the gesture firm and fatherly. "And not just as foreman. I'd be honored to call you friend." Before Caleb could respond, Elizabeth appeared from the direction of the house, riding a handsome chestnut mare. She reined in beside them, and Caleb found himself noticing, not for the first time, how the morning light caught the warmth in her grey eyes. "Am I interrupting?" she asked, a slight smile playing at her lips. "Not at all," Samuel said, "just welcoming our new foreman officially. I'll leave you two to discuss the details." He headed back toward the house, his cane tapping a steady rhythm, leaving Caleb and Elizabeth alone on the rise. "He's healing well," Caleb observed. "Thanks to you. The doctor said another day in those caves, and the infection would have killed him." Elizabeth dismounted and stood beside him, looking out over the land. "We owe you everything, Caleb Stone." "You don't owe me anything. I just did what needed doing." "No." Her voice was soft but certain. "You did more than that. You came back into the world when you didn't have to. You took on risks and dangers for people you barely knew. You honored the kind of principles most men only talk about." She was standing close now, close enough that Caleb could smell the faint scent of lavender soap, could see the fine lines at the corners of her eyes that spoke of a woman who'd known hardship but hadn't let it break her. "My father told me about your wife," Elizabeth said gently. "About Sarah. I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you. It's been 3 years, but some days it feels like yesterday." "I understand. My mother's been gone 10 years, and I still find myself wanting to tell her things, to ask her advice." Elizabeth looked at him directly. "But I've learned that honoring the dead doesn't mean stopping our own lives. It means living in a way that would make them proud." It was exactly what Caleb had been thinking, had been feeling, since the night he pulled Baron from the river. Sarah wouldn't want him hiding in the mountains, wouldn't want him choosing isolation over living. She'd want him to take chances, to build something, to be happy again. "You're right," he said, "and I think I'm finally ready to try." Elizabeth's smile was genuine and warm. "Good, because this ranch needs a good foreman, and I think you're exactly the right man for the job." She paused, then added more quietly, "And I could use a friend, someone who understands what it means to lose people you love and find a way to keep going." "I'd like that," Caleb said, and meant it. Baron stood and stretched, then trotted a few paces down the hill before looking back at them, as if asking what they were waiting for. The dog's tail wagged encouragingly, and Caleb found himself laughing. "I think he's ready to start our new life," he said. "Then we shouldn't keep him waiting." Elizabeth remounted her mare and offered her hand down to him. "Come on, I'll show you around the ranch, introduce you to the men. We've got work to do." Caleb took her hand, feeling the strength in it, the warmth. He mounted his own horse and followed her down the rise toward the ranch buildings, Baron loping alongside, happy and content. The mountain cabin where he'd hidden for 3 years seemed like it belonged to another man now, another life. That Caleb Stone had been broken, alone, living in the past. This Caleb Stone had a future to build, work to do, people who depended on him. He touched both pocket watches briefly, a gesture that was becoming habit. His father's legacy and Samuel's gift, both reminding him of who he was and who he wanted to be. The sun was warm on his face as they rode into the ranch yard. Men working on repairs waved in greeting. A few of the horses in the corral nickered. Life was happening all around him, vibrant and real and full of possibility. Baron ran ahead, barking with pure joy, and Caleb realized the sound matched what he was feeling inside. After 3 years of grief and isolation, after a week that had changed everything, he was finally, truly home. Sometimes the smallest act of kindness really could change everything. Pulling a dog from a frozen river had led him here, to this moment, to this second chance at life. Caleb Stone smiled, a real smile that came from somewhere deep inside, and rode forward into his new beginning, ready for whatever came next.